I'm Anthony Meisner. I work at Land Title here in Boulder, and I've taken a pretty, front seat approach into getting Bitcoin and cryptocurrency accepted, doing peer-to-peer transactions on the title side of things here in Colorado.
And I'm Jim Merrion with Coldwell Banker. I'm a realtor here based in Boulder, and I've been working on, I've been interested in cryptocurrency since 2012, and I've bought some Bitcoin. And most recently, I listed the first home along the Colorado Front Range that had a seller willing to accept cryptocurrency as a form of payment for the transaction, and helped an individual in the spring purchase some vacant land with Bitcoin as well. So I've had some experience on the transactional side as well. So, real estate in the United States is fragmented. There's 50 states, they all have their own rules and regulations. So where there isn't a cookie cutter one size approach, we think that, the future forecasts for how blockchain will be implemented in those technologies across, there, because, there's some states require lawyers to do transactions. Some states, such as Colorado, have more of a, the State Real Estate Commission here creates our contracts. So we have more of a boilerplate that I think makes it a little bit more easy to implement things such as smart contracts into, because it's not reinventing the wheel for every transaction. We have an 18-page contract the State Real Estate Commission creates, and then within there, realtors such as myself can play with about 90 blank spots and 100 check boxes. So it lends itself, I think, better to the idea of having a smart contract play within those areas that are more predefined versus a free-form type of environment. And where I think the role is it's going to be baby steps in certain aspects of that to implement smart contracts into some pieces and then grow it out from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to elaborate on that, even the fragmentation piece, we're talking it's fragmented county to county even. So it's really to the point where you have a company like Land Title who may understand the entire landscape of Colorado and the counties in Colorado, but you have bigger companies that they don't necessarily even, maybe they understand these county to county in their certain regions and everything, but in order for us to even move, we could move some of our processes internally to smart contracts, right? We could move escrow agreements to smart contracts maybe. We could move a lot of these different processes to them, but the real challenge is figuring out how to get every county to be reporting on the same information in the same ways. And so until we have a good feed of data, it's very difficult to just we're going to change this whole process to the blockchain or to a smart contract. Mm-hmm. And those are some of our biggest challenges. They're the biggest challenges in real estate, they're the biggest challenges in lending, they're the biggest challenges in title, where you're seeing we can have some rules and regulations and start to move the needle a little bit, but until we figure out how to solve the underlying issues, it's going to be piece by piece until... And it's not like one entity can come in and overlay everything that's happening. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of companies that have this grandiose idea of we're just going to put in one global MLS and they're going to come in and override everything that's happening. Well, it's very difficult to get buy-in from 100 or 880 different MLSs to start giving them data. Right? Look at what's happened with Zillow. You had a huge pushback from the realtor community, and now the majority of their revenue comes from the realtors. So they had to find their place. So that's, I think, the biggest struggle. Mm-hmm. As far as how adoption is going to happen.
And if I may elaborate on your elaboration, I think because in our presentation we talk about this idea of 3 black boxes in real estate: the the title companies like Land Title, the lenders, and realtors. And when you look at just headcount of companies and people involved in these, there's tons of different realtors, highly fragmented, tons of lenders. Rather fragmented there too, but with title companies, regardless of Colorado or other states out there, there's fewer. There companies that, there's a handful of them in each state, essentially. So I think when you look at what is the low-hanging fruit in implementing blockchain, it's going to be title companies leading the charge, essentially. And since they already are the shepherds of a transaction, they're going to be the ones that are then going to, basically mandate, hey, you've got to kind of follow our ways of doing things in order for this transaction to conclude successfully. Mm-hmm. So, what's going to be kind of needing to happen is what Anthony was saying, like we talked about in our presentation about Cook County, the Chicago, county, moving all their clerk and recorder information to the blockchain. And we're going to need to have 64 counties here in Colorado, really, move all that information to the blockchain in order for the title company to then have a real kind of comprehensive smart contract that they can develop then and implement to reduce that time, reduce that friction, reduce the cost, and then they can kind of pull the lenders and the realtors, into that whole solution.
Yeah, a lot of times it's going to be, we may implement something, we may want to do something. It's going to take legislation to make that happen. It's going to take our biggest lender partners, for instance, First Bank here in Colorado, where maybe we can pull them in first, right? Or we can pull some of the local lenders and say, this is the way we'd like to do things. Let's try to make this happen together. Maybe we grab brokerages like Coldwell Banker, or one of these other bigger brokerages where we can say, hey, let's start to implement these larger scale changes. But it really takes like a whole group effort around doing that. I mean, these changes in real estate are so minute so often because they're so resistant to change that it's not the easiest landscape to shift.
Yeah. And are you encountering people with different opinions and some friction where people don't welcome this kind of change, or where would you see the most of that? Is it within the title company space? Do they feel threatened, or?
The banking industry as a whole is threatened by this, right?
Okay.
Because it's so
lending
disruptive.
Process, or
not just the lending process, but just the banking process as a whole. It's disruptive too. So that puts resistance on the title process because we're so kind of just the foundation of title comes from lending in many cases and comes from this banking processes. Whether that's our relationship with banks that we hold escrow in, or our relationships with large clients. So the real estate companies have the same. Maybe you can speak on this better about the real estate process, but
yeah, part of it's just ignorance too.
That's true too. Yeah.
I mean, it's not even resistance as much as it is resistance to learning.
Resistance to change. Yeah. It's not even the fact. Yeah, and Jim brings up a good point because realtors have a resistance to learning new things and changing in some cases because they've been doing it the same way for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you consider the average age of a realtor is something like 56 years old. Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily wanting to, be the latest, greatest, forefront of technologies. And so a lot of it, the internet as a whole went over a lot of their heads. They don't even understand what online marketing really entails, not to mention now transacting in a blockchain, so
Sure,
it's a seismic shift that has to happen. But it's also, going to really be, dragging and pulling a certain, percentage of the people just into that whole thing, and probably dumbing it down a little bit. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, convincing one person at a time, perhaps focusing on the title aspect or focusing on. So the title process, as we know it now, the title companies are responsible for record keeping, right? But also for insuring. The title. So do you see that as becoming fragmented even more in the future, where the record keeping is going to go to the blockchain and the title companies are going to redefine themselves as being focusing on a certain role?
So our job in Colorado isn't necessarily record keeping.
Okay.
That's what the clerk and recorder's office does. That's what, like in Cook County, is being changed to the blockchain. So if they change those things and they increase those efficiencies, then we can adopt more of that stuff and become more efficient ourselves.
Okay.
So I think it's just one of the dominoes to fall in this huge scheme.
But that insurability piece, is not something that most title companies here in Colorado or even nationally are ready to embrace. There's two forms of purchases, right? There's the peer-to-peer, where you're just exchanging, say, Bitcoin, as a buyer to Bitcoin as the seller, without having any liquidation of that asset. And then the other aspect is, nope, you got to liquidate it first, because I only want cash as the seller. So, that person's going to have to sell their, cryptocurrency to make that happen. And so what title companies are insuring that kind of thing? Well, right now, as far as we know, Land Title is the only title company here that's willing to insure peer-to-peer transactions, and some of them, some of the title companies out there aren't even wanting anything to do with cryptocurrency in any aspect of it. So they're very conservative and hesitant about how to approach that asset class. So that insurability piece has to get wider acceptance in the state, and that's one of the things that we're working on, is trying just to broaden the knowledge base and broaden awareness of how that transaction can happen, because it's really easy for a realtor to say, sure, we'll accept Bitcoin, as a marketing ploy kind of thing for a transaction, but when it comes down to it, are you going to be insured? That's obviously a bigger thing, right. And if you really respect your craft and don't want to be sued by your client, respect your client, you want to make sure that transaction can be insurable.
Right. Okay, well, we seem to be at the very early stage, so the adoption is still slow, but do you think it'll get to the point where those who are slow in adopting will fall by the wayside because the whole industry is picking up movement in a certain direction, or we just don't know yet? That's a little too early to say. Or how do you?
I mean, it's so early in the adoption pattern. I didn't even start getting these questions about, can I buy a house with Bitcoin, or what does that even look like, until last year. So when you're in the crypto space, it seems like we've been in this for a long time. There's a lot going on. From a real estate perspective, it's like this is barely even scratching the surface. So we will, I think, get more adoption. I think people are very interested. I teach classes all the time, just kind of bringing people into the space, and they're all excited about it, and it's very interesting. But there's a really hard question to answer, like how long is this really going to take to adopt? But I think you're going to see some people just choose not to. But I don't think that they're going to have to in some cases. Like there's still going to be a marketplace that's, US dollar to US dollar transactions. Well, maybe that they can retire on that and not have to learn the new stuff. But I think you have an excitement, even in the older realtors, of like, this is something new. I remember when the internet happened and how that changed the real estate industry. I want to be able to adopt and change with the real estate industry.
But like in some marketplaces, especially on the coasts, where there's a large influx of international buyers. I was reading a quote from a brokerage in Miami, and they were predicting that in 5 years they expect 20 to 25% of all their business to be done using cryptocurrency. So it's not necessarily, we're not an island here in Colorado. Certainly we have our own ways of doing things, just like every state does. But when you start to see some of these, perhaps on the coast more than anything else, with influx of Chinese and Russian, buyers and others from other countries transacting in cryptocurrency, and then suddenly, a quarter of their business is based upon this kind of thing, it's certainly going to get awareness, industry-wide as to this phenomenon, essentially, right? And it's going to then drive further adoption, I think, in the interior parts of the country, regardless of whether there's some, aspects of the community that don't want it, because it's just simply going to be, well, they're all doing it this way. We need to start adopting these ideas. We need to start thinking about this in a structural way, and let's reformat our business a bit to, make it more nimble.
In this industry, the blockchain industry has really gotten the attention of the National Association of Realtors, of the Colorado Association of Realtors. They're intrigued, they're interested, they want to make sure there's a place for their realtors still in the space that they're doing business in. So they're very engaged right now, and they want to learn more. So as long as we can kind of keep the interest, and if they can find their space in it, I think it's a very positive thing for the entire real estate industry.
But at the same time, it comes down to what we were saying in our presentation. It's about solving business problems, and if you can clearly show a business case for why this technology needs to be implemented, cost savings, velocity of the transaction, shortening a 45-day real estate transaction down to a week instead, or even less, perhaps. Those kind of things are going to get the awareness of the industry leaders, the people who own the companies, run the companies, the shareholders, to really say, we got to drive further adoption of this, regardless of whether some people are being naysayers about the whole thing. And that idea of wire fraud now is a social engineering problem. We have people who sell their house and wire the proceeds for the next purchase, and somewhere along the line someone was hacked in that transaction process, and that wire instructions got changed, and so now suddenly the Nigerian prince is even richer.
So that's an existing problem with the dollar or with the fiat currency, right? Or it's
right.
So it's going to be non-different with crypto, but it could be more.
Well, in a smart contract, you could set in stone at the very beginning of that contract what the wire instructions are. Okay. And nothing will change that. Whereas nowadays, you can get maybe wire instructions at the beginning of the transaction, but suddenly, you got a real estate sign in your yard, so now someone driving by or someone on a site like Zillow can see, hey, 123 Main Street's for sale. Who owns that property? I'll look it up in public records. Now I'm going to start to spearfish that person because I've identified who they are, and I'm going to try to figure out, maybe I try to hack the agent because their name's on the sign. Maybe I try to hack these homeowners, whoever I can get, right, to get access to then, further that out. And then you insert your wire instructions somewhere along the line by broadcasting an email to them saying, hey, we've changed the wire instructions. And people are like, okay, great. And they send it to that new thing, and it's gone. Whereas in a smart contract, it's verifiable, it's there at the beginning, it can't be changed.
And you can show if things are changed in a smart contract, right? Like that you would identify, you would say, hey, this was updated in this smart contract. Notice that, right? Like those are things we can build into smart contracts. So that makes a big difference where like, wire instructions haven't changed since day one. Yeah. They're still here. They're in stone, right?
Because essentially it's a social engineering problem, and it's really hard to solve a social engineering problem versus just trying to come up with a different way that removes the gullibility essentially.
The way that we're dealing with this right now is literally we're picking up the phone to call every single party at the beginning of a transaction to say, here are our wiring instructions, here are the people, here are who we are. If you ever have any questions or anything doesn't look right, like pick up the phone and call us. And so it's very labor intensive. And it's not a real solution. It's prone to failure. It's prone to human problems. So, with all of the effort we're still doing, that's the best we have currently.
And there's too many realtors that don't understand the depth of that problem or how serious of a problem it is. And so, we might have our clients sign a wire fraud disclosure that says, hey, there's wire fraud, watch out. But if they don't communicate like the why to people, like, hey, you can lose every dollar you've got in this, and in some cases it's their life savings, then you got to really explain it to people in person, let them know what the seriousness is of this, because otherwise, left to their own devices, they may forget that quick little form they signed or whatever else, and suddenly they're following along. People do what they're told to do when there's experts telling them to do stuff, and if the title company communicates a new change in something, they'll probably go along and do it unless they've been sufficiently warned, and that is a big barrier right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, have we yet seen in Colorado a real estate transaction in cryptocurrency, or are you guys getting phone calls yet where somebody says,
a peer-to-peer?
I want to buy a house with Bitcoin?
So I'm getting those. We're getting those calls that I would like to buy one. And I actually just got a call during this conference, or the day before this conference, saying we have some cash, we have some cryptocurrency, we have a seller that's willing to accept it. How do we structure this? So we're getting there. We're very close to getting the peer-to-peer side. We get a lot of those calls of I have Bitcoin or I have whatever cryptocurrency and I want to buy something. So it's still just like early stages. But I mean, hopefully we'll have a peer-to-peer transaction soon.
The banks aren't taking Bitcoin, just like they're not taking stock directly. They're requiring liquidation of assets. So 70% of all deals these days are done with a mortgage, right? And if you're the seller and you have a mortgage, well, at least the bank portion of that mortgage is going to have to be satisfied with cash. So if you own the home outright, you can for sure take peer-to-peer completely for that transaction. But if it's, hey, I've got, $200,000 in equity, the bank owns the rest, well, then the bank is still going to have liquidation occur for that to happen on their aspect, and, the rest.
Yeah, we're still seeing a lot of that. It's going to have to be a lot of hybrid approach before we get to full peer-to-peer, mainly just because of the banks. I mean, those mortgages are really making that more difficult.
So a good start might be the earnest money is crypto, and then it kind of falls back to the traditional methods from there.
Or it could be my down payment's going to be in cryptocurrency, and sometimes you might see the seller want to accept that, right?
Well, but I had that client buy land outright. They liquidated crypto early in the new year, so they made very well, and so he cashed out and bought vacant land, with his proceeds. But it was cash he used for that, and he bought his land for there. But now he's working with a bank on a construction loan to actually build the house on top of theirs. So we are seeing these cash out ones, but a peer-to-peer one in Colorado. I mean, you're working on some.
I'm working on one now. We have not had one yet.
That we're aware of, had that happen yet. So it's baby steps.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. Well, do you have any last words about the distant future or where this is going or anything else you want to say?
Go blockchain or go home. If final words, I think. Inevitably, with just the cost savings, the time reduction, the security around these technologies, we're going to start to see it make these inroads in these transactions at first. But once then we start moving, like escrow is probably the low-hanging fruit for moving that to a smart contract.
Could be.
We're going to see then, it start to open the door. And with people like Jared Polis being, most likely the next governor of a state and having that background in technology like he does and being the founder of the Blockchain Caucus in Congress, you can see, a state like Colorado be more forward-thinking than others. We already have a big technological, base of people and companies here. We can really see that him trying to maybe push adoption in the county level to the cloud curriculum recorder to move to blockchain, and thus then us having a much greater pool of opportunity to implement smart contracts into the whole, industry.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, I do have one last question, but it might be a little bit outside of your scope, but I'm still curious. So there's, of course, different cryptocurrencies, and there's a lot of volatility in space, of course. And then there's certain ones that focus to be more like a stable coin,
Right.
And then the stable coin aims to be backed by real assets. And so how's real estate going to come into play there? So I mean, could you maybe take out a loan that's backed by some real estate asset? And does that impact the space that you're trying to work in, or is that just a separate thing? Or how do you have any insight on that?
Go ahead. Yeah, so right now when you're getting a mortgage, at some point in that 30 days you're under contract or whatever, you're going to lock in an interest rate. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that means that the bank's saying, yeah, we're going to make sure it's at 4.7%, for example. Mm-hmm. Now, the market's still going up and down. Mm-hmm. That interest rate isn't stable. There's no magic lock the bank can actually do on it. Instead, what they do is they essentially hedge what that rate is going to look like. So, they protect themselves and they feel, okay, here's the comfort range. We're ready to lock it in, kind of thing. So there's some, people here I've met at the conference, for example, who are trying to work on a stablecoin solution to essentially cryptocurrency, locking in a value for that transaction, so that, right now, maybe, when you're under contract on day one, and then when you're closing on day 30, that cryptocurrency asset may have gone up or down 30-50%, right? Mm-hmm. So what they're doing is trying to figure out a way to tie into stable coins. Take your Bitcoin or your Ether, and you try to then lock it into Tether or some other type of stable coin, and have it be then essentially locked in. And so they hedge on their side as well on that fluctuation rate to try to have the transaction occur in that regard. But I don't think it's going to have any threat to the business. I think it's a fantastic thing to see, because like right now, how like some the more nimble lenders and title are looking at your crypto portfolio is, well, we'll count it for 50% of its value. When we look at this, we're going to discount essentially our perception of its value, just as a way to protect ourselves in this whole thing. And this would obviously allow someone who is getting cut in half with their purchase power to be able to be up to maybe 90% of their purchase power. And so I think it's a fantastic way to move forward.
Mm-hmm. I don't really have a whole lot to add, other than I fear that the cryptocurrency community is not going to want to go into these stable currencies in some cases because they like the aspects of these other currencies. Just either way, I feel like it's going to be so case by case for now, until we really figure out like a long-term solution or more of a stable environment as cryptocurrency as a whole. That some of these things may be really beneficial for certain people, and they're going to take advantage of it. And the rest of the community is going to do something different, right? And that's kind of the benefit of this environment, is everybody gets to pick their own destiny. And so in the banking world, I just don't see it. I just see them being cautious for a while. I see them making incremental small changes to adoption, and hopefully over time they won't just make one solid decision. They're going to say, we're going to work with you on whatever your case is, which they do in general. I mean, that's how underwriting works. That's why lenders underwriting is, like, a lot of times they're on premise, because maybe your situation is you're showing a higher debt to income ratio, but you're holding cryptocurrency assets and they're not even looking at them, right? Or whatever the case may be. So we'll see the changes we see. I'm not real confident that there's a solution in a stable currency for the banking world. I mean, hopefully there is some really great solution. I just don't see it happening in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe. Maybe I'm a little more pessimistic on this than you are, but
no. I mean, banks are conservative by nature.
They're so conservative by nature. It's very tough.
Well, the way I see it is, some cryptocurrencies are going to be more stable compared to the dollar than others, because they're more linked in with real assets, or and so some of the presentations I saw at this conference, for example, MakerDAO, they issue their tokens based on the assets, the collateral that's presented, and when that collateral is taken back, then the actual crypto coin is burned up, or it's no longer exists. So the coin is only in circulation as long as it's backed by some hard asset, and so that design makes it more stable, and so therefore it becomes sort of a currency of its own that is more closely linked to the dollar, but it's more easily exchangeable with other cryptocurrencies than the dollar. So when you have some kind of crypto, you can more easily go back and forth between a stable coin and a less stable coin, and not having to go to fiat and back to crypto, because that could be a more costly,
the transaction fees.
So I think we'll continue to see different kinds of coins with different types of volatility and stability, and certain stable coins might be more closely linked to the real estate. I don't know. I don't know. It's just.
It's certainly, yeah. I mean, it's really, I think, interesting to see where that goes. And I guess at the end of the day, someone could always just sell their crypto assets. But if they're trying to reduce what they call slippage fees in the business, that hey, I need to sell $500,000 worth of crypto right now. That's certainly a reduction. Discounts applied to that, and then the marketplace you sell it on is going to take transaction fee on top of there. So I think if you're able to reduce those kind of sell costs, it's a fantastic way to retain more of your money. Keep the middleman out is kind of the
That's
the
the idea,
ethos.
right?
I mean, it's so. Yeah.
Well, so do you think there needs to be some local startups to sort of provide technology solutions for what you guys are opening the doors for? Is there going to be a need for blockchain development for titling needs and things like that? Or
I would hope so. I mean, I would love to see more of that stuff happening. I think if people can find their niche and find their piece of the pie and really solve one problem, that would be huge for the industry.
Yeah, and there's certainly companies working on like tokenizing real estate assets and what that structurally would look like, as well as a smart contract specific to the real estate space and how you implement that and take into account all the different state regulations for each of that. It's not the easiest problem to solve, just from the fragmentation standpoint. It's not like the travel agencies were back in the 90s, when suddenly by increasing information availability to the masses via the internet, you suddenly can wipe out 95% of all travel agents. There's just too much fragmentation, local regulations like county level even, and stuff that dictate how this thing we've done for hundreds of years is today. It's a lot of quirks, a lot of different strange ways of doing things in each state. So there's certainly some very complicated problems to solve when it comes to that, and it doesn't really lend itself to one blanket ability to do so. But there are technologies being developed right now on the token side and on the smart contract side, which I think might have some broad applications.
Excellent. Well, it's great talking to you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.